Hello everyone. Today we would be studying about the living world. I am your biology coach. So let's get started. A forest, an ocean, these mountains, a hot spring, a freshwater lake, and a desert. They all have one thing in common, which is that they all have living organisms inside them, residing there. So these are all the habitats where living organisms survive. So, what do you understand by the living world? When we consider living, automatically we think about growth. So, let us learn about the definition of growth. Let us understand what growth is. It can be two things, either increase in mass, which is the increase in magnitude, the size, or the amount, and then the increase in number or the count. With this example, you can visualize that an elephant would gradually increase in mass, which is its growth. Whereas when it increases in number, that would be its reproduction. We'll come on to that later on. Whereas in unicellular organisms, you can think that when they grow, they increase in number. All right. So, what do you all think are the possible features of living organisms? We can say that when growth is present, an organism is living. Similarly, we can say if an organism is reproducing, then it is living. So, living beings interact, right? They sense the environment and then they mount a response to that environment. And you also know about the evolutionary sequence, that how living beings have arisen from the previous living beings. So, growth, reproduction, metabolism, interaction, and emergence are all the possible features of living organisms. And we also know that when something dies, it cannot grow, right? Now we must remember that growth, we would not include it as a characteristic feature of living organisms. Yes, reproduction is, metabolism is, interaction is, which is consciousness. But growth is not a defining feature. Why do we say that? We say that because if a rock would accumulate dust, then it would increase in size, but it is not growth. Like like it is called as growth, but it is not a living organism. So that's why we have removed growth from the characteristic features of living organisms. This elephant, which is a multicellular being, it grows by the cell division, whereas the unicellular organism reproduces by cell division. Also, in higher animals, multicellular animals, growth and reproduction are mutually exclusive events because they replace their lost cells, they repair their cells through growth, whereas through reproduction, they actually increase in number. They give rise to their progeny. Just explaining you the same property, if a human gets an injury, then after a certain time, the cell division only replaces the lost cells. The growth is not continuous in them throughout life. They do not increase in proportion throughout life. After a certain age, when growth is completed, the cell division only occurs to replace lost cells. Whereas plants show continuous cell division throughout life. You can either visualize a small plant, a small sapling growing and increasing in size, or you can think about a tree. When you keep any object in its vicinity, it is going to engulf that. Like here, the tree has engulfed the bicycle because it is growing itself. It is growing itself. So we just discussed the unique features of living organisms. What are they? It is reproduction, it is interaction or consciousness, it is metabolism, where where the chemicals are getting converted into biomolecules so that they can be utilized by the body. And then there is cellular organization of body. Now, understanding reproduction. Reproduction means production of a progeny. And you all know that these progenies have the same features, more or less similar features to their parents. That's how we look like our parents. We look different from our friends or members of a species. They look like each other, like all the deers look the same. They don't look like lions, right? So, you must also remember that in multicellular organisms, reproduction is synonymous with sexual reproduction. So, whenever we are talking about higher organisms and we are talking about reproduction, you should automatically know that in them only sexual reproduction is going to happen. Whereas in unicellular beings, reproduction means that they are growing, right? But growth is not synonymous with reproduction. Reproduction is synonymous with growth because they can just increase in size by the increase of their cytoplasm. Okay, that is not growth, that is not reproduction for them. So, multicellular beings, reproduction means sexual reproduction. Unicellular beings, reproduction means growth. Okay, let us continue further. As we said that growth and reproduction in higher beings, they are not mutually exclusive events. They are mutually exclusive events. They are independent of each other. This example of the diagram is of mutually inclusive. When something is inclusive, they overlap. But mutually exclusive means that these circles would be separate. They would not be intersecting each other at any point. So when we say that growth and reproduction are mutually exclusive events, it means that sexual reproduction, when it occurs, it would produce progeny, whereas cell division, which occurs in somatic cells, would result in growth. Replacing lost cells is also a part of growth. But in unicellular organisms, reproduction is only growth. Another point is that reproduction cannot be an all-inclusive defining characteristic of living organisms. Why? It just means that reproduction cannot include, or in higher organisms, reproduction can't happen all the time because there are organisms which are higher or multicellular, but reproduction is not happening in them. Why? One, that reproduction is not happening, and the other is sexual reproduction is not happening, which means only asexual reproduction is happening then. These are the example. You must be knowing about the sterile worker bees. Their only work is to produce honey or is to bring honey. Whereas there are separate bees which mate with the queen bee. Rest all are sterile. They are the worker bees. You must be knowing about the hybrid. Mule is a hybrid of horse and a donkey. And you must also be aware about infertile human couples. So they are all higher organisms, multicellular organisms, but they do not reproduce at all. And that's why reproduction is not an all-inclusive feature of living beings. Another point is that there are organisms which reproduce by asexual means, like fungi, yeast, hydra, flatworms, and some algae and mosses. Okay. We read about reproduction as the characteristic feature of living organisms. Now, metabolism. Metabolism is the constant conversion of chemicals into what we call as biomolecules, molecules inside living beings, which can be utilized by the living beings. They are biomolecules. Now, metabolism is exhibited by all living organisms. So we can say that metabolism is an all-inclusive defining feature of living organism. It would happen in all the living organisms. So it would be exhibited by plants, all animals, all fungi, all the microorganisms. There is one separate thing, that if there is a test tube, there are biomolecules inside it, then it is not a non-living being, though test tube is a non-living object, but it has biomolecules inside it and reaction is taking place. So such reactions are actually living reactions. They are neither living, they are neither non-living beings. And obviously no non-living object can exhibit metabolism. That's why metabolism is the characteristic feature of living beings. Then third is interaction, consciousness. Consciousness just means awareness. Awareness means you have the ability to sense the environment, be it internal environment in your body, where your cells would be sensing its environment, or be it external, things outside your body. And then the second part of consciousness or interaction is having the ability to respond to the external stimuli. You know, external stimuli can be physical, chemical, or biological. And you can understand it by the example of plants. Plants, living beings, they have consciousness. Why? Because they are able to sense light in their environment and then respond towards it. You have seen that plants grow towards sunlight, they grow in the direction of sunlight, or wherever they are getting the light from, they move towards that direction. Even roots, they incline towards the light source. Similarly, water, temperature, pollutants, they affect the plant growth. Human being is the only organism with self-consciousness. So he is the only being who is aware of himself, not only the environment around it, but also himself. And whenever a person is lying in a hospital whose brain is not functioning, brain is dead, and other organs then are supported by machines, then we can call such a patient as a brain dead patient. And they, though it is a human being, a living organism, it does not have self consciousness. Okay, all right, class, we'll start with the next part during our classes. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.